Is it 2018 already? Postdoc, the New Orleans ACS meeting is coming up. I need data. Again. Yeah, I got a little bit of data to present, but I really need some new equipment. New equipment. Well, time to make it rain.
Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Woo! Nice. This is awesome. You have no excuses now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
What's good? Good to see everybody, or at least
We can't see anybody but each
we
other.
can't see anybody. I'm talking to a camera.
I see a camera, I see a setup, a conference room, and I see you.
Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah. This is the first time we've been back in like a month, everybody. Are you excited?
Yeah.
I know you're excited.
It has been a while. First time both of us for 2024.
That's right.
So you can even say it's been a year that where we haven't been together. But welcome to another episode of Ask Us Anything about electrochemistry. I'm Dr. Alex Paroff. This is my co-host, Dr. Neil Spinner. And this is an opportunity for anybody, to ask us any questions you have about electrochemistry. We get these types of questions from our YouTube videos, webinars, emails, phone calls. We get a lot of questions about electrochemistry. And sometimes either one of those venues is not always the best to really take a deep dive into some of your questions, which is why we have this live stream that's both on YouTube as well as X or Twitter. So the way this goes, we usually have this live stream for about 2 hours, and you can ask any questions in the chat. The questions that tend to get answered the best are questions that are kind of in between the range of very, very specific questions, like what's the exact activation energy of this cobalt oxime complex?
12.
Electron volts. Joules. And then something super like broad, like explain all of electrochemistry, or I don't understand CV, where like a webinar would actually be a better platform for learning those things, which is something that we have for our tier 1, tier 2, specifically tier 2 members.
You know, that was a problem. I think the week that you weren't here,
Oh, yeah.
you've done one without me and I did one without you.
Yeah.
In the last, month or so. And the internet is going to internet, because I said I did this. I tried to do the same, intro, and I was like, yeah, don't ask questions like what is electrochemistry, and then like 5 people were just like, what's electrochemistry? It's like,
well, we'll see what people.
Hats off to you, ladies, people, and putting your crazy questions. Yes.
Yeah.
If you ask and you shall receive from the internet, this is how it works. I'm well aware.
Yes.
So
so we go for about 2 hours. If you're watching this after the live stream, there should be timestamps in the description below. If you didn't have a chance to ask the question that you wanted to, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, either for this video that you're watching or the subsequent video that will be coming up, and then we'll try to answer it the next time around. We will apologize in advance if we mispronounce anybody's name. It is just a YouTube name, so it could be anything. It could be a Pokemon, which actually happened one time.
Yeah, that was fun.
And yeah, I think that's about all the boilerplate stuff. A couple just announcements as we wait for people to ask questions is we have launched a podcast, Neil and I, the Electrochemistry podcast, and it is available on basically all the major podcasting platforms: Spotify, iTunes, Audible, YouTube, Google podcasts. So if you want to listen to something while you're in the lab, you absolutely should listen to the Electrochemistry podcast. So that's something that's new that just started this year. And then I'm trying to think if there's any other, no other major announcements, I would say. But Neil is just showing.
There you go. There's the Electrochemistry podcast.
Yeah, on Spotify. So that's so yeah, so you can get it on Spotify, you can get it in all these different places, download the latest episode. Something to listen to while you're working in lab and you're trying to it's fairly entertaining and interesting to listen to. Well, with that being said, we can wait. I will keep an eye.
There are there's a couple questions that we have from last week that I can try to answer.
Yes.
And I was also just not successful at getting, and it's just like a logistics thing here, but why were we not in video in there? You know, I just shared the screen and like our faces weren't there. Anyway, I haven't used Restream in a while or something. I don't know what's going on.
Oh,
I couldn't, you know, I was trying to get like whatever us.
Yeah.
The video.
If it's one thing is maximized, one thing is.
I didn't do it right. I'll check it out later. It's not critical. I was just curious what was going on.
Yeah.
There were a couple of these questions. I think these are from your one that you did last week. Was that right?
Yeah.
So this was from someone named Faistos. And the question, and I'm going to try to not fly off the handle here because I was talking about this with Alex earlier, and it's apparently very triggering for me, and I didn't realize it. But here we go. So this was a question about for battery research. What is the difference between EIS and nonlinear EIS? Do we get more information from nonlinear EIS? So the answer to your second question is not really, not necessarily. You can get information from what is being called nonlinear EIS. I'm going to try to illustrate a little bit of this. Let me share. Maybe it's because we're sharing.
I think it's just its position.
That's so if it's this one on the side, that's
yeah.
I think the problem as well from
Yeah,
before was that this is and this is like nuts and bolts of using this streaming platform. So everyone's going to really love this. But I think when we're sharing a tab of your browser, it doesn't let you. It only shows the browser. But now I'm sharing like PowerPoint and it's a different program, and so it is allowing. Because when I clicked that, like, you know, show us on the side with sharing a browser tab, it didn't work. I think that sharing a browser tab is like all encompassing. That's just what I see, what it seemed like it was doing. So anyway, we don't need to belabor that. Okay. I think that's just what happened. I think so.
All's good.
Perhaps I'm crazy, but okay. So EIS, nonlinear EIS, right? So if we consider, let's think of a CV, right? I've used this example in my webinars. Oh, this is a really bad drawing. Let's try.
It's not a bad CV.
Let's try again.
Okay.
Ready? Here we go. I'm gonna try again. I waited too long.
No. I mean, that's
so bad. Why am I not a good artist? It's a duck.
That's a.
See, it's a duck.
It's good. You know, it's got a little bit of it's got a relatively slow electron transfer, but that's definitely a good CV. A good CV.
That's so bad. I'm not a good artist. Okay, so the point is for EIS, right? This is voltage. This is current, right? We're gonna take a very small slice because even when it's changing. Right, the current is changing, the voltage is changing over a very small slice. If you zoom in on this, right, it's mostly linear, right? Like the voltage and the current, it's mostly linear, even on the part of a curve. Okay, so the point of impedance itself is that you're doing a small perturbation, small amplitude of current or potential so that things are linear. Okay, and that allows you to get the information that you're after. It allows you to probe processes by their speed, by their frequency, rather than it's casted into the domain of frequency rather than time. You can probe all these different processes. Okay, the primary difference between EIS and what people are calling nonlinear EIS is that nonlinear EIS is that you basically go over this entire range. So let's say this is 0 volts and this is 1 volt. So with EIS, I might have an amplitude, right, of plus or minus, 10 millivolts, 20 millivolts, something like that. The nonlinear EIS folks are doing 1 volt, 2 volts, up and down, something like that, right? Okay, so that's what they're doing. So basically, you can think of quote unquote nonlinear EIS as something like doing a CV, but you're doing it with a sine wave, sinusoidal. So you're going back and forth over the whole thing at different frequencies. Okay, that's like what it is. Now here's where the problem is. The difference between that's the difference between them, quote unquote, right? One of them, basically the size of the amplitude. The problem is that is not impedance. It doesn't mean you don't get information from it. It doesn't mean it's not potentially interesting. It doesn't mean that there aren't potentially analytical solutions to it. It doesn't mean that it's not perfectly valid analysis and research, but it is not impedance. Impedance requires linearity, fundamentally, full stop. That's just the reality of impedance. It has several conditions, one of which is linearity. It must be linear or it is not impedance. So some of this admittedly is me getting irritated at semantics. It's just the terminology, but it bothers me because the analysis of impedance itself requires linearity, stability, causality. It requires those conditions to be met to be able to call it impedance and then perform the kind of impedance analyses that are incumbent on that technique. Okay. And so when you violate one on purpose by using a very large amplitude signal, you're getting information, but it's not impedance. It's just not. There are analytical solutions. I can give a brief kind of reference for, there's a professor, Ramanathan Srinivasan, who's at Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. And I've met him. He's a very, very interesting guy who's doing really cool research on some of these kinds of things. We've had discussions together in the past at conferences, and he's doing these really interesting stuff with nonlinear EIS, and he has very interesting Nyquist plots and all kinds of cool stuff. I've enjoyed talking with him in the past. And I've had some of these discussions with him playfully here and there. Well, I'll be like, that's not impedance, but it's cool what you're doing, you know, stuff like that. In short, though, I don't see this as like a technique that's like replacing impedance itself. You know, it's just a different kind of analysis. You're sort of encompassing the entire voltage, you know, potential window of something, some process that's happening with your scan, right? And okay, and there's analytical solutions to that, and you can get, you know, kinetic information, or I don't know, other sorts of information. I have not personally done a lot of the analyses of this, to be honest, so I can't speak heavily to that, to be clear. But it's just fundamentally my main problem is, again, that it just isn't impedance. It's just not fundamentally impedance. So anyway, perhaps just for lack of a better term, people are using nonlinear impedance as the terminology because it's like impedance spectroscopy, where you're adding a sine wave and you're changing the, you know, frequency, and you're doing an experiment like that. And so that is what an impedance experiment is like. But yeah, so I still think that regular impedance, I'm a bit of a purist in that, I suppose, is more appropriate and allows you to extract more accurately the components, especially if you're doing battery research. I would have very real concerns about doing quote unquote nonlinear EIS at really big amplitudes for a battery, particularly because then you would be swinging the voltage of your battery really, really fast, and that could be really dangerous. Maybe this is more acceptable for other systems, but for a battery, I would have really big concerns about that.
Very, very good. Very good. We have a couple questions coming in. Some of them somewhat general, and interestingly enough, we have two Omsing Vashishta in the comments. One has a 20199 and the other one doesn't. But we'll get to some of the questions. He says, from India, I'm studying a BS and get ready, very ready for his master's thesis in the next few months. I want you guys to suggest topics here on, as my seniors here working on batteries, my instructor to hold study elect. He also goes on to say, that they've enjoyed our videos and helping to learn different things, but also I think I want to know a little bit more about our journey, sort of say, or how we got exactly where we are. So there might be a bit to unpack in this.
I think it's
this question.
Is are you asking for suggest few topics on battery? So I mean that is also quite broad. I mean, the fact that you're working on batteries is probably wise.
Mhm.
If your seniors, as you say, or maybe your lab, your PI or the people in your group or something of that like that are working on batteries. Obviously, batteries are a very relevant and hot topic of electrochemistry research right now.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing. I mean, as far as what to work on, I mean, I can't answer that.
Yeah, there's so many
people are working on anodes, cathodes, electrolytes, separators, coin cells, full cells, half cells. There's 1.5 million things that people are looking to do with batteries. So, for example, I mean, I guess it seemed like your next question was asking about our journey, how we got where we are. I mean, for me, it was actually that I studied high capacity, not really crazy high capacity like silicon and tin, but I studied alternative anode materials for lithium ion batteries when I was in graduate school. And then I did a postdoc studying battery safety, essentially. So I did a lot of stuff in batteries also, getting my PhD in electrochemistry, and learning a lot about batteries in general, batteries specifically, with certain cathodes, certain anodes, how they can fail, how they operate, how to make them better, how to make them at all. Constructing batteries as a whole, obviously, part of it. Same with fuel cells, things like that. So I've worked on a lot of these kinds of electrochemical devices, and I've been at Pine since 2016. Both Alex and I have. So, that's, I don't need to talk about myself forever, I guess. I don't know, unless you're really interested. But that's my sort of, 1 minute story, how I got here, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of the same. It's just like went to grad school, studied chemistry, did a short postdoc, and just applied for jobs, and Pine was hiring. So that's how I got here. But it was electrochemistry research. It was mostly spectroelectrochemistry for me, and Neil's chemical engineering. So that's kind of the main difference I see. And we have like two different perspectives, which I think is very helpful in understanding electrochemistry. So to a degree, we just went through the whole schooling process, and then different opportunities presented themselves. And even now we continue to look at different things or check out different things. When it comes to business, when it comes to chemistry, stuff like that. So hopefully that answers your question. Of course, you can always, if you want further clarification, we can do that as well. Bia, good to see you again. Hello, I'm doing a PhD in physics. Today was on my topic defense, and when I was talking about techniques, the examiner constantly told me that you were talking about physics, or constantly that you were not talking about physics, just telling me chemistry. That might be the case, because
is this our fault?
Yeah,
like, have you been watching too many of our chemistry things, and now your mind is corrupted into the world of chem? Like, you're welcome. You're safe with us.
Yeah,
welcome.
Yeah, that's right.
You don't need to be in the world of physics. It's a scary place. Chemistry is a happy place. We want more people.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I hope that you had a successful defense, though, because getting a PhD in physics, that's
hard.
That's difficult. I have a friend when I was in college who was in physics. He stayed and got a PhD. It took a long time for him. It took him longer than it took us to get our PhD. PhD in chemistry, chemical engineering is usually 4 to 5 years in the US anyway. It depends on the country, I know. I think my friend did physics. He took him like 8 years or something to get his PhD. It took forever.
I had a friend who also got a PhD in physics, but for him, he actually finished in like 4 years. His whole, I mean, he was also like just super smart, but
you saying my friend is stupid?
No, I mean, it's it's like my friend's more smarter than your friend. I'm like,
oh yeah, let's make him fight.
Yeah. But he just described like the way it looked from his perspective, like how I viewed his PhD was like someone did something with like some super hadron collider, whatever. It produced, terabytes of data, just like terabytes and
Oh, yeah.
terabytes. And he spent all of his time just writing code to try to extrapolate parts of the data and then come up with some kind of interesting paper based on it. It's like he wasn't like in the lab doing lots and lots of like, oh, I need to mix this electrode and shoot something over here. No, it was like, oh, it was data science, really. That's all he was doing.
That is
Coding
what
data
I think a
science.
lot of people in physics end up doing as well. It doesn't always end up being as much like laboratory research kind of stuff. It's
Yeah.
a lot of crunching data and whatever. And some people really like that.
Yeah.
And I would be bored by that for too long. Like, I like having some lab time and things like that. Yeah.
Well, I will also mention one other thing, which is that like when I was studying chemistry, one thing that only really occurred or happened to me during my time during a PhD is like, because even though I'm in chemistry, I still might read a chemical engineering paper to try and understand, some phenomenon that occurred, but I couldn't write a paper for regarding or related to engineering. It needed to be a chemistry paper. Like I would not get a chemistry PhD unless I described a chemistry process, like a bond that was forming or a reaction that was going on. Like that needed to be part of the paper or the thesis topic. And so similarly, even though it's science, even though electrochemistry is science, if you're going to get a PhD in physics, the physics examiners are probably going to say like all right, you can get a PhD in chemistry, but you need, for physics, you need to do physics. So I understand that, but that there is something to that, like what the degree means and all those types of things. I don't know if that's any kind of validation, but yeah. Anyway, Bia, good seeing you again. I think we've seen you in some previous live streams. Okay, so we have
I think Ohm had another question about
a different ohm.
unless it's the same. It looks.
It's like exactly the same except for
There's no number.
There's no number.
I don't
which
understand.
almost makes me think it's a different person.
Perhaps.
which is kind of crazy.
I'm not sure, but anyway.
Yeah. So he says, in oxidation step after dropping from peak, what happens in ferric cyanide in KCl solution? So what I think you're saying, it can be one of two things. You're either talking about a cyclic voltammetry experiment where you have a peak for the oxidation of ferrocyanide to ferricyanide, and you're asking what happens after that peak in the cyclic voltammogram, or you're talking about chronoamperometry where you have a step, you apply a step potential and then you see this spike in the current followed by this gradual decay. And I can kind of describe both of those if you're interested. But and you did ask if can we make a video on this? I am actually making a video about this very topic. I want to make a chronoamperometry video, which I am working on. But I can describe very, very simply what's going on in this kind of situation. So am I okay? I think I'm live.
You're good. Yeah.
All right, good. So if you're doing chronoamperometry and so if this is time and this is the potential, this is what you're applying to your system. You're applying this step potential. It goes like this. And maybe I should actually use voltage instead, just so it's a little clearer. So let's just say that's volts. And then you're measuring the current as a function of time. So you end up getting this kind of like spike in the current followed by this very rapid and somewhat gradual decay. And so I think your question is what exactly is happening after this spike? Similarly, you could also be asking the question in the cyclic voltammetry experiment, which is this. Applying some kind of what I like to call a triangular potential waveform or just a linear sweep. You end up getting something that looks maybe a little bit more like this. You end up getting this, and you going here. and this is voltage or current. And you're similarly interested in like what happens after the peak. Okay, so luckily, kind of the same thing in a way happens in both of these. It's just the math and a little bit of our understanding of this is a little bit different, but similar processes are happening. So I just want to make sure I know what is happening to the ferrocyanide. So in electrochemistry, what happens is let's say we have an electrical double layer, and or not electrical double layer, but let's say we have our electrode surface. Okay. And then we have our, I'm just going to use iron and I'll put iron in the 2+ oxidation state. And there's iron 2+ all over the place. Okay. And then and then when you apply this potential step or this sweep, you're getting the oxidation. So an electron is going from the iron 2+ to the electrode, and it's becoming iron 3+. And what ends up happening is all these iron 2+ become iron 3+ near the electrode surface, and it generates a field or a zone which is known as the depletion zone. And I'm going to type this because I have a way of typing it.
I'm going to move the question so we
Yeah,
can
yeah.
see the bottom part.
Yes, thank you.
Mhm.
Depletion zone. Okay, and so this depletion zone just means that the amount of ferrocyanide in the 2+ oxidation state is further away from the electrode, and it takes longer for it to randomly diffuse towards the electrode surface to oxidize or something like that. So the rate of electron transfer decreases, and that is one reason why we see this decrease in the current in both of these situations, both for cyclic voltammetry and for chronoamperometry. So that is a kind of brief explanation about what is happening. You have fewer ferrocyanide oxidations occurring over time because you deplete the ferrocyanide or ferrocene near the electrode surface. All right, let's see. So, and of course, if you require further clarification, just let us know. Let's see. So we have a question from Sisa. Okay. Hello, I missed some, but could you please suggest to people who start from with a 0 level knowledge, I think, with EIS, start from 0 level with EIS. I was thermal energy area, now changed to batteries. I don't fully understand.
I think they're asking.
Question. They were
they
like
suggest
studying?
to people who start from 0 level with EIS. Like it seems like you're asking about a crash course in impedance.
It sounds like it. But what does it mean? I was thermal energy area. Like I like it sounds like you maybe changed fields.
Yeah,
or
something like that.
Maybe
You
something
were
like that.
studying thermal energy, so maybe some sort of a different part of chemistry, and you've moved more to the battery world. I mean, so honestly, this is one of those questions that's too big to really answer quickly, right? I mean, I can't quite easily give you a fast overview of impedance in the time we have, right? I don't know. Tough answer is that we have a webinar, on our YouTube channel. I've done it 3-4 times now. It's a 5-part impedance series where I talk about it from start to finish, basically. I mean, I describe how it works, the theory of it, what it is, how the analysis is done, how it's plotted, and a bunch of test cases. I show how to do circuit fitting. We do circuit fitting. I do live data, the whole thing. So if you're really getting into impedance, that is probably my best suggestion to you is if you join our YouTube channel as a tier 2 member, you can see
Mhm.
my 5-part impedance webinar series. You can watch all 5 of them at your own convenience. You know, they're about an hour to an hour and a half each. There's some questions at the end, you know,
Yeah.
usually like the way a webinar works. And I know that's kind of an unsatisfying answer now, but I can't really like easily give you, you know, other than an advice to have materials like that to study. You know, other than that, it's like you could look at some textbooks, like Mark Orazum has a textbook and Lacia has a textbook on impedance spectroscopy. I've been doing my webinar. It's been pretty successful. I think people do prefer sometimes that medium rather than sitting with a textbook. So sometimes depends on what your preference is. If you learn better just sort of sitting and reading yourself, or you want to watch, you know, video content. That's why I've been trying to do my webinars. But that's the best advice I can give you, right? That's quicker, you know, so to speak.
Yeah. You can also we also have like a generic, like there's a generic EIS introduction to EIS video also on our YouTube channel that just kind of gets you started. And then I'd recommend looking at Neil's webinar series for like a full detailed, like just to understand conceptually what it is. You can watch the regular video on YouTube, and then to actually like, all right, I need to learn this in super detail. The webinar is the way to go. Okay. All right. So Tamim asks, please suggest the best book on electrodeposition. I haven't read any books about electrodeposition.
Yeah, I actually did a quick search. There seem to be a couple, to be honest. I'm not familiar with any of them either. There looks to be this one here. I'll share. I mean, just from what I found, this is a, I'll get there, I promise. This one theory, nope, galvanostatic. Where am I? That's not it. Theory and practice. Theory and practice of metal. Like that's it. There we go. I have tabs on all kinds of electrochemistry things. So here's one. Theory and practice of metal electrodeposition. I mean, I can't exactly vouch for it, to be honest. Like how good it is compared to anything else. There seem to be a couple. There's also a lot of, you know, books on like electroplating, which is not exactly the same.
Yeah.
And then, you know, but generally any electrodeposition process is just a variant of chronoamperometry or chronopotentiometry, which is just also a general electrochemistry topic. So like Barton Faulkner's textbook, you know, just general electrochemistry textbooks are going to go over those kinds of fundamentals also. So I don't know, hopefully that's helpful. Right? Neither of us have read a textbook specifically on that topic, so I can't speak anymore thoroughly about it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know electrodeposition it's big, but I know that like EIS is kind of a bigger topic. Corrosion is a bigger topic. Battery is so those are things where like there are full on books about it that are like thick. Electrodeposition maybe a little bit smaller, but yeah, I think the book that you recommended that was Springer publishes it might be good. So, but yeah, we don't have any hands-on experience with that.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. Sad Zafar, hello. I'm following the podcast. Indeed, very helpful. Good. I'm glad that you're enjoying the podcast. Episode 2 came out yesterday.
Yes, it did.
All right. I have a little query in GITT calculation. There is a parameter called VM, i.e., molar volume. How we can calculate or obtain that thing, the molar volume?
So, I was trying to find. I've actually been not ignoring Alex. I swear. I've been trying to find a paper that illustrates what. So, GITT and PIT are two techniques. GITT stands for galvanostatic intermittent titration technique. It's a strategy. Excuse me. It's a strategy for charging or discharging a battery slowly, hence the term intermittent. So you basically have sequential steps of charging and then open circuit potential. So in doing that, another offshoot, and I'm explaining this, you probably know since you asked the question, but I'm explaining it maybe for those who aren't aware. One of the benefits or the side effects of doing PIT and GITT is that you can calculate things like the diffusion coefficient. So often it's like there's a relaxation effect that takes place when you go from charging to open circuit to charging to open circuit, and you can calculate diffusion coefficient. So and so that is probably where you're getting the idea that you need to know the parameter molar volume. The short answer is you don't need to know molar volume. You actually don't need to know the molar volume to calculate the diffusion coefficient from GITT data. As far as how you calculate it, that's just a physical quantity of your electrode. So it is the volume per mole. I know this is like, I'm just describing the concept what it is, but it's like, you would need to know, it's like density, right? It's density is it's like the inverse of density base, right? And density is grams per centimeter squared, right? So it's like, in theory, if you know the density of your material, like if it's a set material, you know its density, you just invert the density, and then it'd be divide by the or multiply by the formula weight, right? Because you get like grams per centimeter squared. So if you flip that, it's centimeter squareds per gram, and you want to get centimeter squared per mole. So you got to convert grams to moles, and that's just formula weight, right? How many grams per mole? So this is like this. It's just a simple calculation. That's where the value comes from. And I'll share a paper. I think this is maybe this is the one. Here, let me share this. This is an older paper that has some descriptions on GITT and PIT, and you'll have to pardon the lack of a perfect explanation here because I don't remember 100% of the details. This is something I was aware of like with excruciating detail a couple of years ago, and you know how it's sort of like I don't remember in perfect detail, so I'll just throw that caveat out there. Some of this is just the breakdown of the equations for the PIT and GITT techniques. Okay, and so I'll find so here's one expression, for example, that you might have seen in a similar fashion somewhere, and so that is that a certain diffusion coefficient is equivalent to some stuff, and then you have I, VM, ZVAS, and then there's the slope function right here. Okay, but this is where molar volume is right here. VM. It's not letting me. Right there, VM. Right, and so that gives you the impression. So the short answer is that, again, as I described, it's basically just the inverse of density if you really want to calculate it. The longer answer is that the diffusion calculation that you would use for GITT experiment has conditions. And so one of them for these, for example, is the time is much shorter than this L squared over D parameter. And the reality is that I think it's actually something like this. What is more accurate is that you don't need to know the molar volume. What you usually need is a characteristic length, which is also somewhat ambiguous, admittedly, but people will just do something like they'll use the thickness of the electrode, and they'll use that as the sort of, I don't know, estimate for calculating the diffusion coefficient. And so this is the form of the equation. I think that's used more frequently. So you have this L squared over pi tau, you see. So these expressions here essentially there's the problem with this equation where the molar volume is involved is that there's other constants as well that you would need to know that are, I think they're trickier. So there's this S in here. Some of these things are not as conducive for making these calculations. So that's about as much as I think I'll say about this because I can't speak with the most clarity anymore. It's been, like I said, it's been a while since I was really aware of this kind of stuff. But in short, right, in conclusion, you can calculate molar volume. It's basically just the inverse of density if you really need to use it. And then the other is that I don't believe you should need the molar volume quantity to calculate the diffusion coefficient, you should be able to use like something like a characteristic length, and that should be sufficient for both PIT and GITT actually. So the DOI of that paper, let me give you 2 different DOIs because I have 2 papers that are pretty useful on this. Let me share. I'll share them in the chat in just a moment. Alex, you can kind of go to the next papers if you'd like, or the papers.
Next,
The next, I know,
next question.
Yes.
Yes. Give me 1 second. I'm also looking at.
So this is the DOI. This is GITT. I think it's GITT and PIT. Is it? It's basically a paper about thermodynamic properties of lithium aluminum. So I think this is GITT and PIT paper from 1979. So this is like an older one. I don't know if it's the first one, but it's definitely an older paper I've used for learning about some of these things. And there's another one that has some PIT and GITT stuff. I'll put this DOI for you as well. It's from 2010. There's a lot of publications on PIT and GITT for sure, but that's just a couple that might be useful for you. So there you go.
So the next question from Fakrian. Sorry again if I'm mispronouncing your name. We're Americans. Hello, I'm doing an EIS for supercap, and I can't seem to fit the result with a typical EIS equivalent circuit in supercapacitor research. I got a good fit with another circuit, but the component value doesn't make sense. Is there any tricks to how to fit the correct equivalent circuit? Thank you.
Is one of the reasons that it's not fitting because you picked a capacitor instead of a CPE? I guess that's a question.
That's a question then.
Because one of the reasons that things won't fit, especially if you're testing a capacitor, is if you use an actual capacitor, because almost nothing, even a capacitor, behaves like a capacitor. So you might have some trouble getting a fit from that perspective, because you'll have a better fit allowing a non-ideality factor, which is what a constant phase element does. Now, of course, it's tricky because the CPE doesn't allow you to really easily get an estimate for what the capacitance is. You get sort of its CPE value. It's not exactly the same, but that could be one reason, right? The other reasons are hard to know, right? I mean, it depends on what software you're using, I suppose, right? Is it not fitting because the software is having trouble, or because you are not sort of coercing it into place, right? The tricky thing, and this is part of my EIS series I talk about when I do circuit fitting, is that the action of the circuit fit itself is frustrating because it is half the software's job and it's half your job. Sometimes you click your equivalent circuit and you click, calculate or minimize or go, and it looks perfect and you're done. And sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes that's because it's the wrong circuit. And sometimes it's because the software just can't do it very well. So you have to adjust values. And, for things like batteries or supercapacitors, sometimes that's because the values of the capacitors you're trying to fit are really big. It's a capacitor, right? A battery is a similar kind of a situation. It's a storage device. So the capacitor values are really large. And sometimes the resistance values are proportionately small. So it's like when you're trying to fit the way that the software is probably working, depending on what, software algorithm you're using, it's trying to find the right parameters for everything by adjusting them or whatever. And it's like, if the capacitor values are actually way up here and the resistor values are way down here, it's like it's at the extremes of both, and it might have a hard time like settling on that. Just fundamentally, that might be part of the problem. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not looking at your data, and I can't really speak with perfect clarity here. But I guess I wonder if that's the one. But then the other possibility is your job as the researcher is to find what does fit, right? I mean, if you are finding that a slightly different equivalent circuit fits your data more accurately, maybe that's telling you something, right? If you can find adequate ways to explain why, oh, I added another capacitor or I added another Randles element and it fits better. Well, if you can find a way to explain what that is, like what process does that correspond to? Maybe you can't, and that's the problem, and then that's a different issue, right? But if you have the ability to say, okay, well, I added these extra elements, this isn't what people have typically used, but I think this might correspond to this process, and this extra thing means this process, and that's perfectly reasonable too. You know, you're a researcher, you have an inquisitive researching mind, and you're perfectly allowed to give your educated opinion on what things are happening. It might be different than what you see in the literature, but if you can I don't defend it, right, then that could be perfectly valid too. So I wouldn't discount the fact outright that because you're finding a different circuit, it must be wrong. I don't think that is necessarily true.
Yeah. No, I agree. Sorry, I'm also looking at.
Yeah, that's like while one of us is doing a thing, we're looking at something for the next question. So
yeah, we're looking at things for the next question.
I was also equally disengaged while you were talking because I was looking at GITT stuff, and so sorry.
I also do think about being able to find a very well-known system, like for testing a supercapacitor, because if it's the value that you're like, why does this value not make sense? Like, do it for like always have a system, a capacitor or a supercapacitor that you like absolutely know what the value is, and then plug it in, and does your system give you the right value? And that's like, okay, well, the system gave you the right value, but then when you switch it, it's like, okay, now your value is totally off, even though the fit to the circuit makes sense. And maybe there's some interesting science there. But as you were saying, like you have to think about the science that's going on.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you have to say about Tafel slopes for ORR? Every paper does it in such a manner as to get the value that they wish to get. Yeah,
I think
probably.
I think you're onto something.
Yeah. I think people.
There's some reasons for that. I don't know how deep a rabbit hole we want to go down.
Well,
here.
yeah.
The short answer is, let's see. I'll try to give a 30-second short answer to why this is the case. Number one, Tafel analysis is probably supposed to only be used for 1 electron processes, or ORR is a 4-electron process. So it's fraught fundamentally to some degree. There's arguments for and against that, but that's just true. It's like, it comes from like, usually Katecky-Levitch analysis, which is like 1 electron irreversible, et cetera, and ORR is a 4-electron process. Okay. Number two is it really kinetic data? If not, then your Tafel stuff is meaningless and you get whatever you want to get anyway. Number three is where you take your Tafel slope matters. And if you take it over here, it's 40 millivolts per decade. If you take it over here, it's 120 millivolts per decade, and wherever you want it to be is where it is good. And that's the number of, that's the slope that I want. So there's I don't know.
Yeah.
Short list of why some of those things are what they are. I've another webinar I did just last month was on not ORR specifically, but RRDE and these analyses. And I always try to be very, soberly honest about Tafel analysis and Tafel slopes. One of the things that I do when I talk about Tafel slope, I'll try to illustrate that now. Actually, I'll bring up some data. Talk for a second while I find it.
Yeah, I am trying to also look at, well, you have another question, and I think it's related. I don't want to like skip Tamin, who's in the middle, but like you are also asking another question about, while doing LSV for oxygen reduction for my samples, I never get a plateau region. Instead, I get a skewed baseline that kind of keeps sloping downwards. So I just want to clarify, when you say do you mean LSV or RDE? Because usually, like RDE will have a plateau region, like, oh, I've oxidized the thing and now it's at a steady state. LSV tends to, like, it keeps curving. And are you just saying, like, I'm holding my LSV like way, way, way down this direction, and it just like it keeps curving. It never like flattens out. Because if it's LSV, you might not ever really get a perfectly flat plateau region when you're doing the oxygen reduction reaction. That only really happens if you're doing like RDE of the oxygen reduction reaction, or just RDE in general, where you have mass transport control and that. So I guess if you're listening, please clarify to let us know if you're talking about RDE or LSV for this question about a skewed baseline.
It really matters whether you're rotating or not.
Yeah,
for sure. And then the other brief thing I'll say about that, and
Yeah.
I'll show some Tafel data,
Mhm.
is that I'll just jump to the conclusion that you are rotating and you're sweeping and it's not looking good. This is a common problem. It's just one of these fundamental problems about it. It could be a problem of your catalyst. So oxygen reduction reaction occurs at about under 1 volt. So, but bad catalysts have a really big over potential for that. So like you can, for example, and this is an extreme example, you're probably not doing this, but like if you try to do oxygen reduction reaction on glassy carbon, you can. It's terrible, but it will do it eventually. But it's like its over potential is so large that by the time you start reducing oxygen, you're actually almost already producing hydrogen, which is like 1.25 volts. It's like it's like 1,200 millivolts, difference in its potential. But it's so bad at oxygen reduction that those two processes will get mixed, and so it's like you won't get a plateau because like other reactions are like invading,
Yeah.
So it's like when you do it on platinum, you go below 1 and you get this nice, whatever, because it's like 1.23 technically is oxygen reduction reaction. So anyway, the point is that like if your catalyst isn't good or there's something else there, some of the reason why you don't get a plateau is because there's other reactions or gas being produced. Like there's interference from other things, right? So that could be it. Let me share my screen just to comment about the Tafel. I'll just show you and illustrate quickly about you were saying people get with the Tafel. So this is Tafel data. This is like part of my RRDE webinar that I have done a couple times now. So, and the point that I try to make in my webinar, I try to be very clear about this as well. Ignore the fact that there's no units. This is like millivolts per decade. So you can think about slope 0.12 would be 120, right? And so this is like 60 millivolts per decade. So the point I make is that like, yeah, it obviously matters where you take this. And so one of the ways that people sometimes do their Tafel analysis is they find the potential window that gives them the Tafel slope that they want. So here's 120, right? Slope is 119, 120. So it's like, oh, then they take this. So that means that here I have minus 170 millivolts, and this is minus 206 millivolts. So that potential window is the one that matters, and that's the kinetic region, and that's where I get my time. Do you see what I mean? It's like we're just, and I'm not. Let me be clear. I'm not necessarily trying to be so cynical that I think that isn't a reasonable explanation, because it might be. It's just also tricky because it is a way to get exactly what you said. People getting it's like you're getting what you want no matter what. You're adjusting the numbers till they give you what you're after. So there's a bit of that, and it's tricky. Sometimes it's hard to know, is this valid or not? Like, because look, I mean, even just from this example, and this is just some, this isn't great research grade, whatever stuff. This is stuff I produce in my office just for a webinar. I'm not going to claim this is like the highest quality. Like, this isn't ORR, by the way, too. This is RuHex or something else. I was just collecting data in my quickly here. The point is that the fact that I can take anywhere and get a different slope, right? This is not a straight line. And people have stuff like this with their Tafel plots in their papers. You'll see like multiple regions. You'll see like a bigger slope and then a smaller slope, and they'll try to explain it, different kinetic regions. And it's like, I mean, I don't know. I'm not here to say that isn't accurate. I just know that it's a bit confusing if you're looking at it objectively and you're like, I don't know. Maybe it's, there's some questions here. Like, is this a valid way to do the analysis? I agree that there's some
Mm.
some trickiness with the assumptions being made in the calculations that are being done. I guess that's all I can say about it. I don't want to pass judgment heavily one way or the other. You know,
There's some shenanigans going on.
there's definitely some shenanigans. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
so
All right,
Tamim
let's
has
see.
a question. I think we don't want to skip over, right?
Yeah, we don't
Okay.
want to. So it says in chronoamperometry how to calculate the diffusion coefficient from the Cottrell equation. Please show in details, please. So I was looking a little bit into this to see if I could do this kind of easily or show you an example. And it turns out I can't. I can't actually like if I just take a chronoamp data and I should be able to just get some stuff with it. But I do know that in our software, I think when you do chronoamperometry, it will produce an Anson plot. So one thing that is very helpful or easy-ish to try to calculate diffusion coefficient from is to take the integral of the Cottrell equation, which will give you the Anson equation, and then you'll be able to plot the. I'll just show you on a just in Excel here, or not in Excel, sorry, in PowerPoint, just to say that like when you do chronoamperometry, and you have your time, and then you have your current, and you get something that looks kind of like this, right? And then the Cottrell equation relates. There's of course some time independent stuff here, but what you want to do is you want to take this data and you can take the time integral of the Cottrell equation, and let me actually just pull up what the Anson equation is so that you can see it, because this might just make it easier for you to calculate the diffusion coefficient. So the Anson equation is, I'm going to stop sharing and then share Anson equation. So this is the Anson equation right here. Make sure that it's, yeah. So this is it's just the time integral of the Cottrell equation and all these things here. It's a nice line. You get Q, but then all you got to do is just plot time to the 1/2 versus Q. And when you do that, you get something. And now I have to go back to, here to share my screen. So show this presentation, but when you have an Anson plot, you get something. Usually you have like a forward, well, actually you'll have something that looks like this. Oh, it's a straight line. Looks a little bit something like this. It should be just a straight line when you have t to the 1/2. All right, so you get t to the 1/2 and you have q. And basically the slope of this line, just the slope, not worrying about the y-intercept, that has other information, but the slope of this line is related back to that Anson equation. And if you know the concentration, if you know the area, if you know all those other parameters, you can then solve for the diffusion coefficient. So that's the kind of, in my opinion, the best way to do it. You, of course, could plug everything into the Cottrell equation. And maybe if you did just want to use the Cottrell equation, you might be selective with the data points that you select. You may only select these because these data point, and then you just pick a different like time. That's fine. But this allows you to in a way more accurate. Like there's a lot of extra information here that's not diffusion controlled current. So you may want to do something like this. And all this information that could be screwing you up in your chronoamp is contained. It's contained here. If this is 0, it's all contained in this little region, so you don't even have to worry about it. So that's one way, and that's the way I would recommend going about determining the diffusion coefficient using chronoamperometry. I wanted to give you an example of it in Aftermath, but I'm just having some issues pulling it up right now. So my apologies.
Yeah, that's the right way to go about it, though.
Yeah,
it's still good.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. Okay. All right. what is this? How to clean properly Pine EPG electrode. No standard report. Oh, so
Pyrolytic graphite.
yeah, I think it's the pyrolytic graphite. So the only way that we generally recommend is you can only do a very, very light cleaning of any of our crystal surfaced glassy carbon electrodes. Like you don't want to apply a lot of force, you don't want to apply a lot of pressure. It's cut in a certain way to have that crystal face, that edge plane, or basal face. So so when you want to clean it, you need to clean it very lightly with a microcloth, 0.05 micron aluminum slurry. You never really want to go much higher than that, and relatively gentle pressure so that you're able to keep and maintain the crystal face without making it like glassy carbon, basically, or a more polycrystalline glassy carbon. So that's the way that you want to properly clean almost any edge plane or just an electrode that has a crystal face.
Pyrolytic graphite. Yeah.
Pyrolytic graphite.
I think that's the only ones we sell that are like specific crystal faces. Is it
Oh,
the pyrolytic graphite? I think everything else we sell is basically polycrystalline, like platinum and
Yeah.
gold. And
yeah, that's
so
right.
to be clear, there aren't a lot of electrodes that fall into that category. You know, most
Correct.
standard, whatever, glassy carbon, platinum, gold, you know, you don't also have to like
Mhm.
clean it like the Hulk, but
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
but you can polish them and it's fine. But yeah, with those ones you want to be a little careful, I suppose. And you can rinse them, but you have to be careful. You can't use too many non-aqueous solvents. That those ones are epoxy encapsulated. So aggressive non-aqueous solvents can ruin the epoxy encapsulation. So you have to be careful with those too.
Let's see. Okay. So we got a follow-up. So it's actually using RDE. So instead of it being LSV, it is RDE.
Yeah. So that was like we were talking about. Maybe your catalyst is poor, right? And maybe it's not performing very well. So it's not plateauing great because there's other processes involved, or you know, gas being made or hydrogen or something like that. That could be part of it. There's a lot of other little things, unfortunately, that play a role that are just like trial and error, experimental things as far as getting good at doing ORR, getting that plateau.
Can also be some solution resistance as well.
Yeah.
Like there is IR drop that does happen, especially as you're going to higher current values. If you're doing ORR, it's also like there's the diffusion of gases as well. So
if your electrolyte's really clean or not clean, that can matter.
That matters.
If there's extra impedance with your electrodes, how you know your counter and your reference electrodes, if the flow patterns are proper or not. If your working electrodes dunk too far down, the flow patterns aren't going to be right. There's a lot of little things, unfortunately. It really takes practice to get good at. So part of it is if you're just sort of starting doing ORR tests and you're having trouble getting those characteristic S curves, a lot of it's just like practice and little things like that take time to learn. So I know that's not satisfying of an answer because it means you have to go bang your head against the wall for a while, but unfortunately is kind of the reality to a certain extent.
Yeah. I think, you know, also do CV, like do CV non-rotating and then start rotating and then see how things go. And always have a well-characterized electrochemical system like ruthenium hexamine or something that you can just like make sure that there's no instrumentation thing. Because if ruthenium hexamine is also tilting or ferrocyanide is also tilting, it's kind of like, all right, there's like my solvent might not be clean or something like that, right? That's causing this issue. So, or my electrode might not be clean. So yeah, as Neil said, it's a lot of troubleshooting, but that's usually what happens.
This was a clarification from Sumya about the pyrolytic graphite. The question is to know if it's clean enough to start working with without any interference from background impurity. So first of all, with your electrode that you purchased, if you purchased it from Pine, depending on where you are in the world, I suppose, you know, or from one of our distributors is what I mean. You we provide the testing curve. We test all of our
Mhm.
electrodes in our factory. So there should be a curve, I think,
Yeah.
with it that shows its test. If not, email us. We can probably try to find it and then provide it for you, and you can use that as a reference. So pyrolytic graphite does have a higher background current than glassy carbon. It has a wider window as well. If people use it for some of those reasons, I think it's a better substrate for some of these kinds of things. But that is something that can happen naturally. You can also try repeated scans as sort of an electrochemical cleaning,
Yeah.
mechanism, right? Put it in some acid and just cycle it back and forth. That might divest stuff from the surface.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, if you have the test curve, you can compare it to the test curve to see if it is close or similar to what, we tested in our factory before we shipped it, something like that. What happens once we load catalyst onto it, it's hard to remove it 100%, even after rotating. A concise method how to clean it every time. Yeah, I mean, Alex said, you can polish it. You can polish it like you can polish any electrode.
Yeah.
You just don't want to be like overly aggressive. That's all. But the way that the polishing steps with 0.05 micron alumina. So please contact Batsol as well. From the purchase of this, we might have they can check with me for the serial number. I might be able to find a curve, or at least a representative testing curve from a similar one that we've produced, and I can try to provide them with that. They can provide that to you.
There should be a serial number. We can find it based on the serial number of the electrode.
And then so removing a catalyst, you can polish it to remove a film from like a film from a surface of a disc. You might have to do like multiple stages. So you have the polishing pads, I assume the brown felt pads, and you have the 0.05 micron alumina slurry. Get the pad, cut it into halves or fourths, so you have multiple surfaces to work on. Put a little bit of the 0.05 micron polish on one of the pads. Polish the electrode for about 5 to 10 minutes, right, in a circle or a figure 8 pattern.
Yeah.
Rinse it with deionized water. Go to a new pad, new fresh solution. Do the same thing. Do that 3 or 4 times. The reason is that if you polish only with one pad from a film, you might be you're polishing with the film that's coming off, right? So you want to do subsequent steps so that you're purifying the polishing solution, just if that makes sense, right? So and rinsing in between each time, so that by the time you're done with your last polishing step, maybe the 3rd one or the 4th one, depending on how many it takes, you've no longer got any of your film in the suspension that you're still, circling around in. Because that's the problem, is you might just be just depositing, causing it to embed. You don't want to polish with the stuff that you just removed from the surface. You want to polish, but you have to use that method to scrape it off in the first place. So I hope that's clear. So multiple steps of polishing, rinsing with deionized water. Use a squirt bottle and spray it on. Don't touch the squirt bottle to the tip of the electrode surface, but spray it pretty hard so you can get the residue off. And then, like Alex said, like a microcloth or like a Kim wipe, you can use your gloved finger. I try to demonstrate this. Like, this is the electrode surface. You can use a gloved finger and like very lightly kind of press and kind of, dry it that way. Don't scrape and press. Don't use your fingernail. Don't indent the surface. But
you can also use like pure air and blow it off too.
Air.
That's another way you can dry it.
Yeah, that might help.
But I would also I think electrochemical cleaning will also be very indicative. Like, you're trying to get the same current every time. Well, if you put the thing in some dilute sulfuric acid and cycle it like 100 times, you'll eventually get like a very reproducible, like that's the main thing, like getting a reproducible surface, a reproducible baseline for your catalyst experiments. So everything that Neil said is going to get like 95, 99% of the stuff. And I'd say that like that extra 1% is just stabilizing the carboxylic acid groups that just made it, that just got stuck to the glassy carbon or the OH groups or something like that.
Yeah.
That's what the electrochemical clean will help you with. So there's a question from Muhammad. In case of water splitting, 1.23 volt is required. Then why we change catalyst? It can be done by any type of catalyst.
Well, no, it can't. That's the point.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1.23 volts is required if your catalyst does a good job. But if your catalyst doesn't do a good job, then more is required. That's similar to what I was just 1.23 volts is the fundamental E0 for the oxygen reduction reaction, which is also the oxygen evolution reaction, just backwards, right? So whether you're reducing oxygen or you're producing oxygen, the standard potential is 1.23 volts versus RHE, right? So if your catalyst does a great job at that reaction, it will reduce oxygen or produce oxygen, depending on which direction you're going, at or around that voltage. But if it's bad, it won't, right? It's just like I said, if you have glassy carbon and you saturate your solution with oxygen, like try this, it'll be a fun experiment for you. Get a glassy carbon electrode, get sulfuric acid, and saturate it with oxygen gas, and then start at 1 volt versus RHE and just start scanning negatively and watch for when it actually starts dipping negatively and reducing oxygen. It takes 1,000 volts. It's not that long, but it doesn't happen right away. Like it doesn't happen. Glassy carbon's a terrible OR catalyst, which is good. It's a substrate, right? It doesn't get in the way. Like if you put platinum on carbon on it, or you put palladium, or you put ruthenium, that does a good job at ORR, right? And you don't want your substrate getting in the way, which is the point, right? It doesn't really interfere or contribute. And if it does contribute, it's not much. Like comparatively, even when you compare the bit of oxygen that glassy carbon reduces, it's like 1% of the current that platinum will do. It's like, it's so bad, right? It's really bad at it. So to your point, what you're talking about is the theory. The practice is that catalysts, some of them suck. And that's why it doesn't always do that. Right. So no, not any type of catalyst can exactly do that, actually.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
So you also asked a question about Tafel slope, but I did just talk about that, and I showed a graph. So
okay.
So said what does it tell us? Demonstrate by drawing graph. So I just showed a Tafel plot in our software just a few minutes ago. Right. And what does it tell? I mean, briefly, it gives you kinetic information. The Tafel slope is a rearrangement of the Butler-Volmer equation. It is pure kinetic information. And I mean, I guess I can talk about it more if necessary, but I did just talk about it. So I think I don't know. I'll spare everybody another long-winded Tafel thing. I just talked about it for a good amount. So
no, absolutely. But of course, if it's like, I really want you to say it again,
if you really want me to say it again, then please go ahead and insist. I suppose I can.
So we have a question from Farah. Hi, I want to know about supercapacitors. They discharge very fast compared to batteries. I was curious that what's if they discharge so fast, then what's the benefit of using them to store energy? That is, and I know Neil knows a lot more about stored energy than I do, but that's the advantage. Sometimes you need to discharge and get a lot of energy very quickly in a very short period of time. And from my limited knowledge, supercapacitors are very helpful for like electric cars, because if you're trying to accelerate and get a lot of energy to get up to speed on the highway, you need to discharge and get a lot of power very quickly in a short period of time. So that's the main appeal of it. But once you're cruising, once that initial acceleration is done, you're just cruising like that. The battery can just discharge at a constant rate. But getting power very quickly is what I think capacitors are really useful for.
Yeah. I mean, a car is actually the example I was going to use, a perfect example. And not even just electric cars, regular
regular
vehicles actually have a mixture of batteries, and even a car that it runs on like petrol, gasoline, has capacitors and batteries in it, right? Your car has a battery, your battery can die, right? And the battery is usually used to run things like the heating or the air conditioning system, if your car has one, the radio and various electrical functions, right? As cars
Yeah.
as time has gone on, cars need more electrical functions, and so the batteries are doing all of that. There's an alternator that runs to charge the battery while the car is moving. And if you think about the way a car works, in the case of what Alex said of an electric car, yeah, you need things more like capacitors to have a quick discharge of energy, as compared to a long and slow and consistent provision of energy, which is what a battery is better for. But it's that speed, right? It's fundamentally you need different speeds, and even just from the perspective of starting a car, when you're starting an engine, you need a quick turnover of energy to get it rolling, get it moving. So you need a quick discharge and a burst of energy, and that's I think it's a capacitor. Capacitors are involved with that process. But then once everything's running, you need a steady stream of energy, which is what batteries excel at. And just like running even from the electronics in your car, like letting the lights on, right? Like unless you need to like flash your lights at 1,000,000 lumens for a half a second, a capacitor is great for that. Otherwise you need to keep your lights on with a consistent intensity using some small amount of energy over a long period of time. So a battery is excellent with that. They're just different, right? They're both charge storage things, and that this is perhaps overgeneralizing to suggest that all supercapacitors are discharged in like a nanosecond. I mean, it's not exactly.
Oh yeah,
but,
no.
But the point is that it is generally the case that supercapacitors are a quick amount of energy for a high power in a shorter amount of time, and batteries are generally better for longer drawn out power and charge applications. Right. So they're complementary, right? They're not one isn't better than the other, right? They're both needed.
Yeah.
I
actually don't know how much capacitance a supercapacitor has. Like, what's a typical supercapacitor?
It's a good question. I think it's usually done. Usually people show it by like specific area, like farads per area, right?
Oh, farads, yeah.
So I don't know what how many millifarads or farads like a supercapacitor should have. You know what I mean? Like for what size it is. I actually don't know that either.
Yeah, I'm just curious because it's like
I know the numbers for batteries, but not for supercapacitors.
Oh, okay. So it looks like capacitance comparison of storage technologies, and it just looks like it's like from 0.1 to 470 farads of capacitance. And then they have specific energy in like watts per watt hours per kilogram. And like for a battery, it's like 0.01 to 0.3 watt hours per kilogram. And then for supercapacitors, it's 1.5 to 3.9 watt hours per kilogram.
Yeah, it's higher power.
So yeah, it's an order of magnitude there. But anyway, yeah, no, that was just interesting because I don't know off the top of my head. Like I'm used to like the capacitance of like an electrode. It's like microfarads, and that's huge because it's so small, and yet it has so much capacitance compared to like an electrical circuit that you put a capacitor in.
Yeah, you start getting into milli and then farads or whatever. It's like astonishingly large for what electroanalytical chemists are looking at.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
But that's like the battery thing I was talking about. When you do like circuit fitting on batteries, you get these CPEs or capacitors with like farads or even like tens of farads sometimes, or or CPE, the equivalent CPE unit, and it just like sometimes the software has trouble with it because it's just such a big number.
Yeah.
Because it's like.
But I also think about the time it takes to charge a capacitor.
Yeah. That's why batteries, you want to charge them up for like an hour, right, or something. It's like they take a.
I'm thinking about like an RC circuit and how the time constant associated with an RC circuit for something that has like farads of capacitance compares to something with like milli or microfarads of capacitance, and it's like, well, maybe like is it like in the seconds or is it in the microseconds?
Well, so
Is it
if you
the-
think about it in terms of a battery, it's like obviously,
Mm.
technically speaking, it's like if you have, micro to millifarads, and now you have milli to farads,
Mhm.
it's about 1,000 times
yeah,
faster, slower, really slower,
yeah, slower.
right? But the trade-off, of course, for like something like a battery is that they often have 1,000 times less resistance.
Yeah.
So the time is the same.
Yeah, that's
you
right.
know?
That's right. So
It's
yeah,
like the
resistance
capacitance is way
between-
higher, but the resistance is way lower. So ultimately, the time constant is similar.
Yeah.
Perhaps, maybe not always. If one is much higher than the other, but like
Oh,
batteries can have milliohms of resistance, like really, really small
Yeah.
resistances.
just kind of just almost
So,
kind of
and they have to, right? That's part of
Oh, yeah.
that's part of why, I think, if I'm thinking about it, probably a good explanation for why batteries are constructed the way they are. Like, they require pressure.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't really work well to like make an electroanalytical experiment in solution the way you do anything else for
Yeah.
a battery. Like if you just
Mhm.
dump anode, cathode,
Mm-hmm.
whatever in like a solution, it doesn't really work because it's
Oh,
so
interesting.
slow.
Yeah.
Because now you have resistance there. It's like a
Yeah,
non-aqueous
yeah.
electrolyte. So you have probably a kilo ohm of resistance.
Oh, wow.
And now you have, a millifarad or a farad of capacitance. It's like, it would take you, right? Like whatever, like a 2 hours just to start doing I don't know. Like
Yeah.
you can work out the time constants or whatever, but like I've tried it. Like it doesn't really work.
Yeah.
It's so slow. It doesn't really work. But as soon as you start pressuring everything together, you
Mhm.
make a coin cell, you make a wound cylindrical cell.
Yeah.
You're like pressing everything so close together. The effect of
Yeah.
that is it's reducing the resistance,
Yeah.
right?
yeah.
Everything's so close together. So it's like you're reducing the impedance, the resistance between the
Yeah.
anode and the cathode. The diffusional paths are smaller.
And it doesn't short.
And it doesn't, well, as long as it doesn't,
As long as it doesn't
if
short.
it shorts, the resistance is 0.
Yeah.
But-
yes. It's
hence it's short.
exactly
Yes.
0.
Yes. Then it's like 0 time constant. That's my favorite.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than a short, it's like you're reducing the impedance as much as possible, the resistance.
Yeah.
And so you're getting yourself, the ability to charge it up in a reasonable time frame,
very
within a
fast time.
reasonable,
Interesting.
in a reasonable way, I suppose.
Yeah. No, I only bring that up because like I was talking to one of our colleagues, Lee. He's just like super genius, super smart, and he was telling me some information about how the potential in your, when you apply potential to the working electrode, the formation of the electrical double layer establishes the potential of the working electrode. So when you tell it to apply, like when you say apply +1 volt, if you don't have any supporting electrolyte that creates the electrical double layer, you will not form 1 volt. And that means that the time it takes for the electrical double layer to charge is in a way, it's a limit to how fast an electron can transfer. So you could have a molecule like ruthenium hexamine or ferrocyanide or something that, even though that has like a super fast electron transfer, if the supporting electrolyte doesn't establish the electrical double layer fast enough, you won't be able to see the, like ruthenium hexamine won't do an electron transfer until that potential's been established, even though it could theoretically transfer electrons faster. Something
That's
like
trippy. It doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense to me.
that.
I think Lee might be full of it.
That could be maybe, but
I'll have to talk to
it
him
got
about
it
it.
got me thinking a lot about capacitors, and it's just like,
Yeah.
so important for so many different things.
Important, but also they're a pain because everything bad that happens in electrochemistry is the result of capacitors.
Yes,
If it weren't for capacitors, every potentiostat would work perfectly.
yeah, that's
Because capacitance exists, our
Yeah.
electrical engineers have to like work their butts off just to get everything calibrated and work, right? It's basically it. It's because of capacitance.
But then you also so how, because there was one time I was talking to Lee about what is it about, like, so we know that reference electrodes can cause problems in impedance in the high frequency region because of the glass.
Yeah.
There's capacitance like 8 picofarads of capacitance in the glass. But that also plays a role in DC techniques as well, because you can still sense and detect things on very fast timescales, and you
Yeah,
can
it
still
depends
get
how fast it's
oscillations
going.
based on stability filters. And I'm like, oh my God. And it's just because of that 8 picofarad capacitor that we see oscillations in the DC techniques.
It's
So
only if you go really fast, though.
that's true. That's true. But it's also like, and it depends on the load on your electrochemical cell. Anyway,
Yeah.
I digress. But we do have another question from Farah. Let's see, why a complete cell potential is always measured in 2 electrode systems and not in 3 electrode systems.
So if you're referring to something like a capacitor or a battery, I always like to make this distinction. I don't know if it's accurate. It's just the way I think about it. I think about the difference between potential and voltage. When you're talking about a 2 electrode system, I like to call it voltage, because you're talking about the voltage. It is a potential difference, but it's the difference between your 2 electrodes, right? It's the actual potential. So when you have a 2 electrode system, everything's equal and opposite, right? If you have 1 volt, when you're connected a certain way, that means that this is 1 and this is -1. Like they're equal and opposite. The current that's happening at one is the opposite of the current that's happening at the other. And when it comes to determining the energy that you're getting out of the system itself, the battery, right, the capacitor, that voltage is relevant, because that is the most, how do I say this? The most accurate measurement of the stored energy and the system of the electrodes that are present, right? It's the difference in energy between the thermodynamic processes at each electrode. It's a direct measurement of the energy that you can get from that. The difference between that and a 3 electrode system is that in a 3 electrode system, what I just described is not the case. You do not have equal and opposite between working and counter. You do not have an equal and opposite current or potential occurring, because you have a 3rd reference electrode from which you are measuring the potential of one or both of your electrodes. So the purpose of a 3 electrode system is to study the potentials of each of your anode or your cathode, let's say, independently, because you can learn something about it. Like you can learn something about what's the potential. Like, here's my voltage between my anode and my cathode, and it's big or it's small. But and that is fundamentally, like I said, helpful, because you know how much energy I can get. If my battery is at 3 volts, it's fully discharged and I can't get any more energy out of it because it's 3 volts. And I know what that is. But is it 3 volts because my anode is really bad or because my cathode is really bad? Right? You might want that information. The ultimate state of my battery is such that it's fully discharged and I can't get any anything out of it. But a 3 electrode measurement would allow me to say, okay, well, my anode potential by itself is this. My cathode potential by itself is this. Well, clearly it's bad because the anode potential isn't where it should be. So something is wrong with just the anode. Like, that's where the 3 electrode system comes into play, and why people sometimes do 3 electrode system, measurements for things like batteries or capacitors, because they're trying to study just one of the electrodes at a time, trying to study something about it fundamentally. But it's sort of like if your phone isn't working anymore, right? If your laptop dies, right, because the battery is fully discharged or dead or something, it's like you might be curious about whether it's the anode or the cathode in the battery that's causing it to die, but the reality is that it's dead. I hope that distinction is clear, right? It's like one of them is the discovering why, and the other is just the absolute state of things. So that's sort of the answer to the first part of your question. Why is it all? I don't think it is always. That's not necessarily true, but I understand your point. It's like it's typically measured in 2 electrodes, because most of the time we're interested in how does my thing perform? Is it dead and can I use my computer, or is it alive and I you can't use my computer, or is it alive and I can still
Yeah.
call my friends, or nobody makes phone calls anymore. Text, right, or go on social media. I don't know. I'm old. Whatever. I hope you understand the point,
Yeah.
right? Right. That is in general, I suppose, why the 2-electrode measurement is really more appropriate for a lot of these. You're just trying to learn what the cell can do, what the battery can do. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it dead? Is it alive? Something like that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think my only comment is that the counter electrode just maintains charge balance. So the potentials between the counter and the reference, or the working and the counter, will be different compared to the reference in the 3-electrode system. But your charge should be equal and opposite, because we have to have.
Oh yeah,
balance.
I said it.
That's
I said
the
it wrong.
only.
Yeah, the
only
charge
thing.
is yeah. I said they're not the same. Yeah, the charge is. Thank you for that correction.
No,
That's
no,
correct.
all good.
The charge is equal and opposite, but the potential's not.
But the
Yeah.
potential's
Yeah,
not.
yeah. I said both aren't, and that was wrong.
That's all good.
I don't know anything about potentiostats.
No, I don't either.
That's good.
We got an interesting question from January, February. What is the best way to learn Java? I don't know. I mean, when it comes to learning a programming language, I'm usually under the impression that the best way to learn it is to have a project that requires Java, and then do the project, and then like just figure out, like, I don't know how to make this square, and that's the first part of the project. Well, then figure out how to make a square in Java, and then you can do like the next step and the next step. But like, projects are the ways to with coding. I don't know. I think that's all I know about it. But
I mean,
I don't know.
at this stage as well, like, we have like ChatGPT and AI programs you can probably use to be like, generate code for me. I'm not saying use that to not learn. I'm saying, like, if you're really trying to actually learn the language yourself for real, you can say, like, hey, write me some code that does a simple thing, and then you can expand on it. And if you want to, and like, I do this all the time. Actually, I shouldn't say all the time. I do this from time to time. I don't know Java. I'm not a frequent coder, but I do know how to write macros in Visual Basic, which is like the language of Excel for running scripts and things like that. But I perpetually forget it every time. Like, I don't do it for a while, and then I occasionally need to write a macro to analyze some data or something, and I'm always like, I forget. It's like, are there commas, are there semicolons, or is it
Yeah.
what's the syntax, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I've used like C++ a little. I've used Python very briefly in the past. I use VBA, and it's like, I'm not a frequent enough coder that I like intrinsically know the syntax of every one of these.
Mhm.
And so every time I do it, I always end up being like, I don't know, because I don't know how to start. So I pull up some code either that I made, or like search for somebody's code, and I just start from there. And then and it's like, step by step, I'm just like Googling everything, like how do I do this function in VBA? And I find, oh yeah, that's right. And so it's like, that's really kind of the way. It's really more like, it's really hands-on. You're going to want to just like start with some code that you can like look at and, compile it, run it, whatever the mechanism is for Java, like run it step by step, run a simple one that just like does 2 + 2 is 4. Okay. Whatever, and then slowly make the code more complex as you learn, as you figure out the syntax. And, if you're adept at coding, that'll probably go a long way. Or just make ChatGPT do it for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. So the next question, Fernando. Is it okay to estimate the electrochemically, I guess, active surface area from the forward peak of the CV detection of a metal like copper, using the variation of the Randles Sevcik equation for irreversible reactions? My SPE doesn't correspond to ferrous cyanide. I think you can. I think that there are a lot of things. You just need to make sure you're working in a very well understood system. So, for example, the Randles Sevcik equation really works for things like calculating diffusion coefficients, because usually, most of the time, people don't know the diffusion coefficient for a specific molecule or species. And so that means if you're going to use the Randles Sevcik equation to determine the area, that means you must know the diffusion coefficient,
Mhm.
and you have to know what the concentration is and all these other things. You can now. The one thing to keep in mind is one of the reasons why platinum and hydrogen work for traditional calculations of the electroactive surface area is because hydrogen is and protons are very small. Like, in fact, it's like the smallest thing. So, so
It's almost like it's the first element.
it's the first element. It's only one proton and one electron. So anything else that you use, any other molecule that you use, is inherently going to be bigger, which means that it could be blocking potential active sites electrochemically when it's reduced or oxidized on the surface when you're using the Randles Sevcik equation. So that's the only drawback and thing that you have to consider, is that the molecule that you use, ideally you want it to be as small as possible with good electron transfer kinetics, such that you can use the Randles Sevcik equation and make a good, okay estimate for the electrochemically active surface area. So I hope that was helpful, Fernando. Let us know if you have any kind of further questions about that. Decha, do you guys know about Kolbe electrolysis? I just did a quick Wikipedia search, and it's just it's a 2-electron reduction reaction of looks like 2 carboxylate ions, and it just allows you and it releases CO2, and it allows you to create a dimer of it's a type of dimerization reaction. So that's all I know about it. But what if you want to, I haven't done anything with it. I haven't particularly done any reactions. I haven't done it in practice. So if you have questions further about the reaction, I don't know if I can help you.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. I don't have any knowledge of this. I have no experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it looks like it looks like you need to do it in a basic solution, and you have maybe 2 carboxylic acids. Oh no, let's see. So decarboxylative dimerization of 2. Yeah, so you need carboxylic acids or carboxylate ions. So you could put some sodium, a sodium carboxylate or something like that, and then reduce it to form CO2. And I don't know what the catalyst is for this kind of reaction. But anyway, but if you have questions about it, you can ask. But that's
Yeah, we don't know
our
much more
experience.
about it. So other than general electrochemistry
Yeah,
things, I guess, right? I don't know. Yeah, sorry.
yeah. Someone is asking, Smith Visa, what is resistance? Resistance is the ability it's a property that describes how that limits the flow of electricity or electrons, current. That's what resistance is, very, very simply. And it's related via Ohm's law, where the voltage is equal to the current times the resistance. So if you have a very high resistance, you have less current that flows per unit of voltage. And if you have a very low resistance, you have more current that flows per unit voltage. That's probably the simplest, best way to think about it. Just resistance itself. All right. Going down, we have, I tried making sodium hydroxide using sodium chloride and electrolysis. After the electrolysis stopped bubbling, I boiled the water and got white powder that does not react.
With water, I
react
think.
with water. Why is that?
So first of all, I don't know what this method is, to be honest. If you're trying to make NaOH with electrolysis, I assume you're trying to apply what I guess a negative potential to release protons and leave hydroxide there or something, but you're not getting rid of the chloride. So, I like this electrolysis is you're not gonna, like, if you add NaCl and you're sort of hoping to like make NaOH, like you're not getting rid of the Cl. So when you boil your water, you're gonna have all of that there,
Yeah.
right? As far as what's left over that's not dissolving, and the theory being, well, if it's NaCl, it should dissolve. If it's HCl, it should dissolve. If it's NaOH or NaCl, it should dissolve. It's probably impurities. There's probably something else in your water you're not aware of.
Yeah. That's also
And
another important
it
thing.
probably made some precipitate, especially if you're just zapping it with some crazy amount of, it could be some metal precipitate from whatever electrode you're using. I'm not sure this sounds like an effective way to make NaOH, to be honest with you. I would be careful because what you've made might not be safe.
It's I don't know the industrial processes for doing this, but like you're gonna, to complete the reaction, there needs to be hydrochloric acid there too, right? Like the Cl has to react with the H in water to do that. And unless there's a way to separate it, I mean, I don't know if you actually.
I don't think
I don't even know if you're actually doing it.
I mean, you might be bubbling for a while. I believe you put a big charge into a thing and you're bubbling. You're making gas.
Yeah, it could be making chloride gas.
You're making. I mean, you're making hydrogen gas if you're putting really negative potential, probably.
Yeah.
But if you have two electrodes in there, it means you're also making oxygen on the other one. So, like, I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure whatever you're doing is not making NaOH.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that what you're doing is very possibly making some other side effects that you want to be a little bit cautious of, perhaps. Be safe. I don't know what you're getting as a white powder at the bottom, especially if it doesn't react with water. There's some crystalline precipitate, something. Might want to have some caution. Is my
I'm not really so sure what you're able to generate, and we don't know what potentials you're applying to,
what electrodes you're using, the purity of your system. There's a lot of questions here, but I would be careful at what you're doing, because you might be making something that's a little toxic or dangerous. So my caution to you, please be safe and don't injure yourself.
Let's see, right. So this is just kind of a follow-up. But so the drawback is that you might be likely getting a lower estimation of the electroactive surface area. Correct. That's my thought.
Yeah.
What would you consider the hardest math class you have taken?
I always hated Laplace transforms.
Oh, wait, is it a class or?
Well, it was like part of
a class.
I don't know. Was it differential equations? I guess I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the highest level math class I took was differential equations.
I took PDEs. Partial differential equations are pretty tough.
Yeah.
Partial differential equations, a lot of it's like getting Bessel functions as the solutions and these kinds of really wonky. I like it though. I don't know. I like math. Math's always something I really enjoy. So.
I think all the math involved in quantum mechanics is super hard.
Yeah.
That like the math classes are one thing, but then it's like, when they actually just like, all right, quantum mechanics 2, and they have all these like
I got an answer. You know what the hardest math class I ever took was?
What?
When I was in high school. We did it wasn't a class, it was part of whatever, maybe it was even part of calculus. Calculus I didn't find too difficult, but we did a unit with probability and like permutations and combinations and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I can't do it. I don't know what's wrong with me. Like,
wait, what to do a factorial?
Well, so like it's simple if it's factorial. I don't know what a factorial is, but it's like our teacher, like, I don't know why I lack the like DNA to do this. I don't know what's wrong with me. Like the teaching of these concepts of like combinations and permutations and stuff. There was a notation for it that I was like a big P or a big C, and it was like it's the kind of thing where it's like, all right, if I tell you what is the probability that I pick one card out of a deck of cards
Oh.
that it's a spade, and then the next card I pick is a heart, and then the next
Oh,
one is between
okay.
the numbers of 3 and 7.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And it's
okay.
like, okay, well, it's like 1 out of 52, and then it's 1 out of 51, but no, it's like 11 out of 51.
Yeah.
But like, what if you took one of these, then it's like 10 out of 51. And it's
Yeah.
like, you know,
okay,
like
I understand.
that
Yeah,
whole thing,
That's
I
hard.
can't do it. I don't know like, I was always pretty good at math. And I'm pretty good at like analytical mathematics and,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, we did that in class when I was in high school for a while. And it was like, I don't feel like there was any like way to teach it. You just do examples like that. The teacher would just do examples like that
Yeah.
and just hope that we would get it. And I would always get it wrong. I'd be off by 1. You know what I mean? I'd be like,
Yeah.
oh, I didn't think of that. Oh, it's like, like the simplest ones, like if you flip a coin,
Mhm.
it's 50-50,
Oh yeah.
right? And then what's the chance that it's going to be tails twice in a row? It's 25%. Then it's 1 out of
Oh,
4. Then
yeah.
it's 1 out of 2 times 1 out of 2 times 1 out of 2. Like that's the simplest one, right?
Yeah.
But like the car, and then it's, like what are the chances that, I don't know, anything, just pick a thing. Like I can't, I hate it. Or what are the chances that like 2 things that you take are,
Yeah.
both, I don't know, that whole, that's like voodoo math. That's not real math.
It's not real math. And the funny thing is about like flipping a coin multiple times, it's like, well, technically there should be a 50% chance of getting like heads or tails. But if you do it like 100 times, like it's not. Like
Well-
you actually get like long strings of like heads and long
But
strings
that
of
doesn't mean
tails.
that it's not still the percentage.
That's true.
That's
That's
like,
true.
I mean, in some sense, it actually might not be, because if the coin is not perfectly weighted, it might
Oh
actually
yeah.
have- but
yeah.
that's actually what you just described is something that is basically known as the gambler's fallacy,
Mm,
right? It's like if you're at a casino and you go to a roulette table,
yeah.
right, and you see that it's been black 4 rounds in a row.
Yeah.
The fallacy is saying, oh, it landed in a black number.
Right.
It's due for a red number.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
That's a fallacy.
yeah.
It is the exact
It's the
same
exact same
percentage and
percentage.
chance
Yeah.
that it will run in a red number as a black number every single time, irrespective of what it did before. But
Yeah.
casinos know this. So every roulette table has a screen that shows the last 10 rounds that it did,
Oh yeah.
because people are like, well, it was just red. Now it's going to be black.
Yeah.
It's likely. And it's like, no,
yeah.
every single time is its own independent thing with the same odds,
Yeah,
unless
yeah, yeah.
they're lying and cheating, which it's like, it's Vegas. So
It's
maybe
Vegas.
I don't, but I mean, in the absence of like chicanery,
yeah.
you know what
yeah.
I mean? It's actually a fallacy. It's
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
but people do that all the time.
It is. Yeah. It is very funny. It's very interesting. Oh, so what did the triangle say to the circle when they wanted to buy a house?
Oh boy. What?
Let's cosine.
Oh,
I heard that joke. Just let go of some random math jokes that come out there.
Oh, it's a math dad joke. Why did you do that here? We could do that in the podcast.
Oh, I know. Well,
That'd
we
have been
could
a
use it
great
for the
podcast.
podcast another
We'll
time.
have to use it for the podcast. The podcast is like dad joke central.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, that's amazing.
All right, we got a couple questions coming in.
I see one about the Nernst equation. I know you're excited.
I'm always excited about the Nernst Equation.
Yes. This is a good question. This is philosophy. Why do opposite charges attract?
I don't know.
I can't tell if this is an actual question or it's just a silly question.
I have for me, it's just been one of those things that like you have to accept. It's like one of those axiom
QED.
principles. Yeah, it's
Right?
like
It's just true.
it's like you assume that, and then everything comes from there. And it's also, I think one thing that's also important to note or think about with that is that like it's the fact that they're opposite that they attract. Like we give them plus and minus, but like if some civilization came up with like circles and triangles are opposite, they just put like ruthenium hexamines in the 3 triangle state and instead of the 2 circle state or something like that. It's just they're just opposite, like, and it's the opposition that creates that.
You know what?
That creates the attraction.
I will co-sign that theory.
Co-sign that theory.
Yes. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, I listened to this like comedian who did like just a bunch of like
Math jokes.
math dad jokes, and it was great. I was laughing.
That sounds right up our alley.
It's just like I went to a class and like I said, 50% of you guys are are going to be below average. And they're like, oh, I know that's a mean joke, if you know what I mean. I was like, that was good. That was good.
Oh
He's good.
That's phenomenal. You can tell who the smart audience members are because it's probably a bunch of people just staring.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't get it.
Okay.
I went to the wrong comedy show today, clearly. That's funny.
That's
So Naina asks, what is reduction potential? I mean, very loosely, right? It's the energy associated with the reaction that involves adding an electron to a species.
Yeah.
I guess that's as general as I can get.
Yeah.
The energy associated with the addition of an electron to a species, because a reduction is a reaction where electron is added to a species. And the potential is the energy associated with that.
Yeah.
And it's with respect to something else, we usually pick the default hydrogen reaction as the standard, but that's arbitrary.
Yeah.
So it's just the energy associated with that.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, that's right. And the reduction potential and the oxidation potential for one species for a redox pair is the standard potential. And it's just at what point do you oxidize or reduce this thing? So they just call it reduction or oxidation.
Yeah, we just pick reduction as the
yeah.
convention as well. Everything's a convention.
Yeah. What's concentration cell? Just knew that it has to do with hydrogen. How is concentration cell used in real life? Concentration cell.
That rings a bell, actually.
I have not heard of concentration.
I feel like
cell.
I've heard that. Let me. Hydrogen at unequal pressure.
I'm gonna look up the concentration cell.
I feel like I have heard this before. I want to try to refresh my memory.
Concentration cells are galvanic or voltaic cells made of two half cells, each of which containing the same electrodes but different concentrations. Oh,
Of hydrogen.
okay, that's interesting. That actually feeds right into the
Interesting.
Nernst equation.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Talk about the Nernst equation.
Talk about the
please.
Nernst equation.
Yeah. So Jay, it's a good question. I feel like in the past years I've known about this. I feel like I've seen this sometime when I was in graduate school. I've never really used this setup, but it does definitely involve the Nernst equation. So I'll just talk about that in a second. But I mean, it's something where you're working with a differential of hydrogen pressure across a membrane or across two parts of this, two compartments, something like that. And as any more specifics, I honestly don't know, but it involves this amazing equation, which Alex is his favorite equation. He wants to talk about it.
Yeah, and then we'll get back to Farah's questions after that. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about the Nernst equation, which will provide some.
Actually, the Nernst equation will lead into Farah's question.
Oh yeah, that's right. Everything
talk
is
about how pH shifts.
Okay, all right. So the Nernst equation, I always kind of get this right or wrong a little bit, but it's like the electrode potential. Actually, you know what? I always like share this. It's so much easier if I just go to Wikipedia, type the Nernst equation, and then
it's
start
way better
talking.
watching us scribble incoherently and and have a tough time.
Yeah. So
I can't write and draw very
well. Writing and drawing is strugs to funk. Oops. Here. Now we got Nernst equation. Okay, so let me instead of going here, just go to Wikipedia. So the best version of the Nernst equation, I would say, we'll just kind of zoom in here. I would look at this. This is the easiest way to think about it. So the potential of your electrochemical cell is equal to the standard redox potential of that cell or that half reaction minus RT over ZF, and Z is the number of electrons transferred, F is Faraday's constant, and then the natural log of Q, where Q represents the ratio of the activities or concentrations of the reduced and oxidized species given this equation, where OX plus an electron or Z electrons goes to red. So that's the general form of it, and it looks like this. So, and what it basically means, and now that we at least have seen the equation, now I can share my screen and show you how you can start to think about the Nernst equation in a relatively simple term, which is to say that if you have a solution or some kind of electrochemical cell, this is one of the simplest ways to think about it. And let's say it's in solution. And I just have a wire of platinum, something that has a fast redox reaction. Okay, so that's PT, that's platinum. And then I have two redox couples. I have iron 2+, and that, well, it's a little bit too big there. Iron 2+, and I have iron 3+ in solution. So I got both of these in solution. And the reaction is something like, we'll do the exact same thing. We'll have iron 3+, just like from the Wikipedia article, iron 3+ plus an electron gives us equilibrium with, I'm going to put this down here, iron 2+. Right. And so that whole natural log part of the Nernst equation has to do with the activity. I'm just going to put concentration for here of iron 2+ over the concentration of iron 3+. I can never remember if it goes inside or outside the brackets. But but the key is that this times some constants, Faraday's constant and all that stuff, minus the standard redox potential of this reaction will get you the potential of your, or in this case, the Fermi level of this platinum wire. So, so this will give you the Fermi level or just the potential if we had another electrode here. So the surface potential or the Fermi level of this platinum will be governed by the relative concentration of redox species in solution. And so that is one way of thinking about conceptually the Nernst equation, how it works. And what electroanalytical chemists commonly do is they do things like cyclic voltammetry experiments, where instead of the concentration of these species that I add into solution, they'll only put one of them in, and then they'll use a potentiostat, an outside power source, to control the voltage or the potential of that electrode, platinum or glassy carbon or whatever. And they will then adjust the concentration profiles of these two species at the electrode surface. So that is what happens when you do cyclic voltammetry and you get like this little duck and stuff like that. There's also a concentration profile change over time. So as time goes on, the concentration of one guy goes like this, and the concentration of the other guy goes something like that. And there will be a point. There's a potential in the middle, which is your standard redox potential, your E0. So all that stuff is happening. It's a way of relaying the potential to the concentration. Of course, also somewhat at equilibrium in a way. So I hope that made sense. Of course, because I could talk about this for a long time, but that'd be boring, and or people have questions.
It's not boring for you. You love the Nernst equation.
I love the Nernst equation. A little bit too much.
I think that I'm a Butler-Volmer guy.
You're a Butler-Volmer guy. I like Butler-Volmer.
I think it's just like my thing.
But just remember, Butler-Volmer at a certain limit becomes the Nernst equation.
Don't do that to me. Don't you
at the kinetic limit.
Don't you trivialize my equation just because you're right. You know, the nerve of this guy. Everything has to be the Nernst equation.
It's such a good equation.
I'll take my Butler-Volmer. Thank you.
Yeah.
Why electrochemical potential window varies from material to material, like CV of carbonaceous materials. It's always shown in negative window. Well, I don't think that's always true.
Yeah.
First of all, it depends on a lot of things. But back to the Nernst equation.
Yeah.
There you go. I did the Nernst equation. Back to the Nernst equation. One of the explanations that I can give for this is, let me erase this stuff. My duck. I drew an actual, I drew an actual duck.
That was a whole like nonlinear EIS
I know.
conversation.
This is way back.
Way
when.
back.
That was like 1,000 years ago. The Nernst equation, E is equal to E0 minus RT over NF, natural log of Q, right? All right. So one of the explanations for why does stuff shift? Well, one of the reasons is pH, right? So if you think about pH, I think I'm going to butcher this. It's products over reactants.
Yeah.
But H plus OH minus gives you water. So this is, I'm not drawing this right. I'm not thinking about this right.
I mean, that's true. You could
I want to for the Q, right? I gotta, or it's like I should do like H plus H2O gives you H3O plus. That would be better, right? Something like this.
You could. I mean,
the point I want to make is that it's related to the Q here. I'm never going to draw it right. I don't know why I can't do this right. So something like you end up with the ln of the H plus, right? It's not something like that, and it's over 1 basically.
Is this like for hydrogen reduction to hydrogen gas, like proton reduction to hydrogen?
Yeah,
gas?
I should. I'm trying to illustrate, and I'm doing a terrible job at it, why you get a shift in pH using the Nernst equation. Let me try to do it a little bit more generally here. All right. R is 8.314. T is, let's just say room temperature, 298. N is 1. Right. I'm just showing you the numbers here. Right. RT over NF. F is 96. 485.3. All right. When you do this mathematics and then natural log, okay, so what we really want is log base 10. So if we do this to log base 10 of Q, we end up with like the log of E, 1 over the log of E, just to convert from natural log to log base 10. Okay. So I just want to show you this math right here. Did you make the question go away? Because it might be behind it.
No, I didn't, but it's still there.
Okay.
I guess the only question I have is he's asking about the electrochemical potential window.
I know. Well, that's what I'm trying to say is that
okay.
One of the reasons might be because you're changing the pH. And you're talking about like in the literature, people are showing whatever. I know you said it was about material, but sometimes the answer is because it's the pH. So all I'm trying to show you is that the answer to this math is 59 millivolts. All right. So what this means is that you end up with 59 millivolts times the log base 10 of H plus. This is basically pH, right? pH is the is basically
the negative log of the concentration of protons.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the point of this is that potential shifts, just say 60, right? Minus 60 millivolts per pH unit. So this might not be the exact answer to your question. I just wanted to show where it comes from. It comes from the Nernst equation. So I wanted to piggyback off what Alex just did. The point is that one of the reasons you might see a shift of potential windows is not necessarily because of the material, but it's because of the pH. If you're working in, for example, if you're working in pH 1 or pH 14, you'll have like almost 800 millivolts difference in the potential window or the potential that things happen. Because as the pH goes up 14 units, all the features shift negatively by 60 millivolts per pH unit. And it's related to the Nernst equation because it's proportionate to the amount of H plus, basically, that equilibrium, that shifts it. And then the other possibility is that different, right? I mean, it's just general, right? Like different catalysts materials behave differently and perform differently.
Yeah.
Like I was talking about before, if you were here, I was talking about how like carbon is terrible at ORR. You like start scanning and it takes forever to do anything. So you have to like do a different window because it should reduce at 1, but it doesn't until minus a million because it's terrible. Like I'm exaggerating obviously, but like some of that is the reason, and then some electrodes, you have to limit their window or change their window because the electrode itself might, Just for example, like carbonaceous materials, generally speaking, you don't want to overly oxidize them. They could damage the electrode itself.
Mhm.
But negative
Yeah.
potentials aren't as dangerous generally
Yes.
on the carbon. So that might be an example of why you're seeing more negative potentials on some carbonaceous materials as opposed to more positive ones, because you might just oxidize the carbon itself and then you fry your electrode.
Mhm.
But yeah, anyway, I hope that's, I don't know, a few. Do you have anything to add? I mean, I just,
Oh yeah, no. Potential windows are always governed by like all the stuff that's there, like the working electromaterial, the solvent, the if you have copper as your electrochemical material, it's like, well, you're going to form copper oxide naturally, just not even applying the potential. Copper just naturally starts to oxidize, with water and oxygen. So the potential windows is always limited by the material because of the other potential electrochemical reactions that can occur. So that's both working counter, reference to a small degree, but and then supporting electrolyte, the solvent. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. We have a few more. We're at 3
I've
o'clock.
got to wrap it up here. So let's just do like a couple more and
Yeah.
then we'll be done.
Um,
This is a quick one. Just what's Gibbs energy? Gibbs energy is a combination of enthalpy and entropy. Enthalpy is like heat.
Yeah.
Entropy is the amount of disorder in a system. So Gibbs free energy is a way to capture the energy more completely, I guess, if you want to say.
Yeah, I think of Gibbs free energy as a way to determine whether or not something is thermodynamic, like whether a process is thermodynamically spontaneous. Spontaneity is usually the word. So if something has a negative Gibbs free energy, it means that it's thermodynamically favorable for that process to happen, which means given enough time, that thing will happen. But and this is helpful because like, oh, you're trying to do you're trying to convert one molecule to another molecule. It's like, well, there's a huge Gibbs free energy barrier. So that thing is never going to turn into this thing unless you do something like change the temperature or add a catalyst or something along those lines. I hope that makes sense. What Gibbs free energy is. And then let's see. Jay was also just mentioning, like in the concentration cell, maybe both anode and cathode are the same material. Yeah, I did a quick search. It looks like anode and cathode are the same material, and the redox species is also the same, but the concentration of the redox species is different, and that actually will cause electron transfer to occur. That's almost like a redox flow battery in a way. It's like you have just dissimilar concentrations, and it's like, oh, well, one will start oxidizing, one will start reducing as they approach their the potential or just their standard redox potential. Again, Nernst equation.
Yeah, it's always the Nernst equation.
That was the Nernst equation.
This is the last question, and we got to wrap it up, everybody.
Yeah.
Can you explain how to fit a DSC, differential scanning calorimetry exotherm, for decomposition reaction into Arrhenius form for thermal runaway modeling? I'm not sure how well I can do that. So a DSC exotherm is showing the energy as the temperature increases, and Arrhenius form is where you are plotting the natural log of the rate constant against 1 over the temperature. So a DSC isotherm, you don't have the rate constant. I don't 100% know. Generally, the Arrhenius plot is 1 over the temperature against natural log is on the y-axis and 1 over temperature is on the x-axis.
Oh yeah, I think of it
But
from the other, well, like the exponential form, so that the rate is equal to the Arrhenius constant e to the 1 over here, minus 1 over t. So I think of it a little differently. But
usually, I mean, you could do it either way, right?
Yeah, you could do either way.
But usually, you take the inverse of the temperature and the natural log of something. I don't understand. I don't know. I guess in the exotherm, if the y-axis is energy transfer of some kind, I suppose you take the natural log of that. It's roughly equivalent to a, technically, like Arrhenius equation is like K. It's like a rate constant of some kind. So maybe you're equivocating that. So what you can do is take the natural log of the y-axis and 1 over the x-axis, plot the data that way. So you have xy
right.
of your DSC isotherm. Take 1 over the x-axis, take the natural log of the y-axis, plot it, and look for linear portions. And then in theory, if you get the slope of a linear portion, the slope of the intercept, I think it's is it the intercept? One of them will give you, in theory, the activation energy, right?
For thermal runaway model, which means
And I don't know about that. I don't know about the last part. Yeah, thermal runaway model. I'm not sure
yeah, I don't know.
how that plays in a role. But
Yeah.
I'm just sort of generally describing how an Arrhenius plot, analysis sort of works. And
yeah.
people use Arrhenius relationships for a lot of different kinds of stuff because
Yeah.
the Arrhenius equation is somewhat widely applicable.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
minus EA over RT
Yeah.
form,
Yeah.
kind of appears in a lot of things. So that's the best that I can kind of give you there. I don't have any specific
Yeah.
knowledge of what you're describing exactly.
Yeah.
But we have to wrap this up because we're over time now, everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do hope that this was useful for everybody that asked questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So-
I hope so. And yeah, stop by next week. Yeah, we'll be here. Stay tuned to the Electrochemistry podcast. And thanks for stopping in.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Bye.